The debate over St. Peter's foundational role in Rome, in other words Peter's first visit to Rome. While many Christian traditions, especially Roman Catholicism, hold that Peter was the first bishop of Rome and that he visited the city to establish the church, there is very limited contemporary historical evidence supporting this claim, particularly regarding the specific timing and details of his first visit. Here's why the documentation is somewhat uncertain. 1. Early Christian writings on Peter's role. The New Testament itself doesn't provide direct evidence that Peter ever traveled to Rome or held any significant leadership role there. Acts of the Apostles, which covers much of the early church's activities, focuses on Paul's missionary journeys and mentions Peter in Jerusalem and elsewhere, but it doesn't mention him visiting Rome. The first epistle of Peter doesn't explicitly mention Rome, though it's traditionally associated with being written from there. 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 13 refers to the church in Babylon, which some have interpreted symbolically as referring to Rome due to its association with paganism at the time. Two. Early Church Fathers' accounts. Clement of Rome, late 1st century, mentions Peter's martyrdom, but there is no clear mention of his early activities in Rome or of him establishing the church there. In fact, Clement's writing is often seen as a reflection of Peter's legacy rather than documentation of his actual role in the church's formation in Rome. Ignatius of Antioch, early 2nd century, another early church father, does mention Peter's leadership role, but his letters were more focused on encouraging unity within the early Christian communities and don't offer a comprehensive account of Peter's ministry in Rome. 3. Later writings and traditions. The idea that Peter founded the church in Rome seems to have been developed and popularized much later, particularly by Roman Catholic traditions. By the 2nd century, Christian writers such as Irenaeus, late 2nd century, claimed that Peter and Paul both established the Roman Church. Irenaeus is an important source, as he was writing about the apostolic foundations of the Roman Church. However, his accounts are written decades after the events he describes, and they are not corroborated by earlier historical sources. 4. Lack of direct evidence. While early Christian tradition, including papal succession, claims Peter was the first bishop of Rome, the historical record does not directly verify that Peter spent a significant amount of time in Rome prior to his martyrdom there. Eusebius of Caesarea, 4th century, the church historian, writes about Peter's death in Rome but does not mention much about his initial arrival there or his role in establishing the church. Thought balloon. Why is this important? The uncertainty surrounding Peter's first visit to Rome is significant for a few reasons. Foundational claims. The Catholic Church has long held that Peter was the first bishop of Rome and that his authority passed down through the papacy. However, because the documentation of his early presence in Rome is sparse, this claim has been questioned by some. Historical understanding. The historical role of Peter in Rome, as well as his relationship with Paul, becomes harder to pin down without clear evidence from early sources. Tradition versus history. The tradition that Peter founded the church in Rome is a powerful narrative within Christianity, but it's largely based on later Christian writings and interpretations rather than contemporary historical documentation.